Hey Sam, how are you?
Hey, John. Nice to see you, sir.
What's up? What's up? Welcome to the Adtech Cafe. So good to have you.
I'm happy to be here. I'm ready for my half calf decaf grande latte.
There it is. Fantastic. We'll take two. So Sam, tell me something. As CEO of Camelot, I read that you continue to win business. Just recently, it was Hardee's and Carl Jr.'s. So what's up? What's the secret of your success? How come you just keep winning stuff? What's going on there?
Well, first of all, appreciate that. We'll always love all the support. So one is we've seen a string of things over the last couple of years that have been very interesting, and I think Carl's and Hardee's are part of that trend. Um, so very simply, I mean, they're both, very well recognized brands and
Yeah.
perhaps what you would call national brands, but their
Yeah.
footprint is not really national when you look at it. Um, and so we've seen businesses like theirs. I mean, I would put Dave and Buster's in that mix, as well as a number of others where, there's a lot of questions on whether uh, TV should be playing first or whether digital, i.e. CTV, should be playing first. And I
Right.
think we've been able to make the case that digital should be playing first, because we can, basically target in and around, stores. We can appropriately focus on under-penetrated and over-penetrated DMAs certain ways. We can do a lot of really clever stuff. And then the other piece, the kicker and all, is you can measure it. And so I think
Yeah.
the trends, frankly, are our friends. And I wish I could tell you that, it's the greatness of Camelot. I think it's our view of the world. I think we tend to view things from the bottom up, not from the top down. And I think
Yeah.
there are more and more businesses where we're able to be pretty prescriptive because in that bottom up view, you're able to plan and execute media related to the opportunity. And the way I always sort of say, you want the impressions to fall in a certain place that gets a certain audience. And I think for some of these businesses, they look like a Carl's and a Hardee's, in many cases, they look younger. They look more multicultural.
Yeah.
They are more digital. And
Yeah.
so you can make the case. And so we call that process de-averaging. And we think some businesses it's easier to de-average than other businesses.
Yeah.
So applying the same old playbooks doesn't really make sense because there's a lot of waste and other things. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think we're squarely in the camp of that. We think there's a lot of great consumption changing happening in media, and it's benefiting agencies like ours that are analytical, that are digitally inclined, and that are sort of outcome focused. So
Yeah. So with all of that, the de-averaging stuff and the focus on the regional and the capacity to target and all that jazz, and at the same time you have the degradation of national reach vehicles across the board, right? So everything is getting all fragmented. It's never going to stop getting more fragmented, right? So what would you say if you could snap your fingers would be the 2 to 3 top things of complexities around both of those things that you would just fix, like boom, they're done.
well, look, I don't think it's any secret we're all struggling with planning,
Yeah.
because there's the challenges of planning. And I think I'll tell you the three things we struggle with
Yeah.
and how we think about it. But I mean, we struggle with planning. We certainly struggle with measurement.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put onboarding on there as well, because I think first party onboarding is really, really, really critical in data.
Onboarding data, not onboarding the clients, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think of those three things as almost like 3D chessboards,
Yeah.
because sometimes the
Interesting.
measurement platforms don't align with the execution platforms. And so what you're trying to do is, you're trying to string a narrative through there. And sometimes the tools fall very neatly. And, from a planning standpoint, it's very clean. Then from an onboarding standpoint, you're able to bring on first party data. And then from measurement, it's very straightforward, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And I think because we do build plans that are fairly bespoke for clients, sometimes it gets really challenging. Like, I'll give you an example. I mean, we have a client that's an MSO, and MSOs, their footprints don't fall neatly into DMAs.
Right. Yeah. they're
And
all over
so,
the place.
and a lot of measurement tools really break at the kind of levels that you're
Yeah.
talking about. And so that gets really challenging. But then you have the
Yeah.
other side of the equation, which is you try to go for media that has massive reach against those audiences, and it takes you to a handful of conclusions on the media pieces. So then you're like, okay, if that's the case, how do I put all these things together? And you don't get full pictures on anything. You get partial
Right.
pictures on everything.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, and it's you're piecing together the puzzle. It's not a complete picture.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that I find so surprising is how often brands have to deal with point solutions and cobble them all together, and then therefore rely on their agencies, right? So to your point, that 3D chessboard, you then become a system integrator to some degree, right? And
Very
you're
much
looking
so.
across this landscape, and roll back the clock to 1980s, 1990s, that was not part of the remit for an agency to be able to manage many, many point solutions, to come forth with the best one to figure out all these complexities, right? Where do you see that going? Like, is it the responsibility?
Well, it's funny. So what I would sort of say is Camelot has instinctually done that for 40 years as an agency, and I'll sort of walk you through kind of how we got here a little bit. But I mean,
Yeah, that'd be great.
the start of the agency, the founder came out of P&G, and I'd say he was a very classic packaged goods marketer.
Yeah.
And he always loved starting with the customer file, and he would map the customer file, with addresses and zips. And we would actually look at customers relative to footprints of the business, footprints of the competitors, all those kinds of things. And inevitably, you would conclude in every time you did this, businesses, even though they were quote unquote national brands, they would have places where there were strengths, and they'd have places that were weaknesses, that have places where competitors were encroaching, and they'd have places where they had fortresses. And so, but when it came to time for media execution, it was always very binary. Either you buy national TV, you buy local or national media or local media, but and digital was kind of, hey, get some incremental reach with digital. Right. And so for a long time, we always had that process in place, even though when it came time to decision making, you tried to make the best of the decisions you had. And look, for a long time, the efficiency of TV made a ton of sense in just about every client. I mean, you could make the case for national TV very easily, for the spill, for the reach, for all kinds. There were so many good reasons. I think today what's happened on that is you get to that final part and you're kind of like, okay, national TV in this particular instance, it may reach only 50% of the audience if we're lucky. And, what about the other 50%? And so then you're left with, okay, do I do that because it's easy, or do I do that because it's smart? I mean, like you cause yourself questions. And so what I would sort of say is, like, all of that process at Camelot's always been in place. Where the system integrations now are coming in is where we're taking multiple data sets, multiple planning tools, either, everything from what the publisher sees, the platform sees, to institutional tools that agencies have used from the beginning of time, to what we know about the client footprint or the competitor footprint, and so forth. And so, I think yes, we are cobbling things together, but I think we're trying to make very calculated bets on things, and we're not betting on things that we think are reaches. We're betting on things that just make sense. And what I would sort of tell you is where we're seeing marketers today, where they're really helping us cobble together the whole picture, is when they actually give us access to the data. Yeah. And we can see the kind of the whole thing, and we can see the cause and effect of what's happening. And I don't have to know how the blades of grass are necessarily performing. We like to know that, but I think the bigger picture is, is the bigger outcome happening? And if not, why? And then we can start to look
Right.
at those whys, you know.
Yeah, so on that point of the whys, right? To your point, measurement's got a ton better, and everybody's looking at the impact on business outcomes. There's no question about it, right? And the correlation between media metrics and business outcomes. But do you see the day in which people will be selling on the metric of business outcomes? Like media will be transacted on a business outcome once a deal is done. I know we have some of it already out there, like there's certain CPA
I
deals.
think there's insurance policies to a
Yeah.
large extent, and I look
Okay.
at them as insurance policies because
Yeah.
you know, I don't think of them necessarily as guarantees. Look, and look, there's so many elements that go into making a campaign successful. And I'll tell you,
Mhm.
there's nothing worse than when you're in the agency role of, you know, doing something big for a product that doesn't have or product or service that doesn't have a reason to exist or doesn't have a strong proposition, that the creative isn't, you know, breakthrough. And then the side of that is that we can put together a lukewarm media plan and that not break through. And then the other thing is there's so many macro factors. And I think we try to understand what we think are the things that are bearing down the heaviest so that we, you know, in terms of the factors we can control.
Right.
And try to, you know, we call it concentrate, dominate, magnify, but we try to concentrate the things that we do. We try to, you know, dominate the vehicles that matter the most. And then we try to magnify the propositions in some way, either through, you know, a proposition that makes, you know, if it's a travel related one in the airport, it gets magnified because you're traveling, or if you're on a highway and we want you to turn left, it gets magnified because you're hungry. But I think my point to you on the guarantees is I think there'll be certainly audience guarantees. I think there'll be delivery guarantees. I think asking someone to sign up for simply performance, I don't know anyone in the value chain that would do that because there's so many dependencies.
Totally.
And you know, and I think I'm try to be respectful of our partners because I think when I want them to have, you know, skin in the game, that's different than asking for a guarantee.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. So back to your point about when the marketer can share some of the signals about how the product is going left, right, and how the company is performing and the data respectively, one might consider that's leaning into the MarTech tools that are out there, right? And mainly we're talking about ad tech tools that are actually purposely buying the media. So does that mean that we'll see a convergence of these two, or do you think because of the way organizations are set up that you have a totally set of different constituents that manage that marketing side versus the ad tech side? Like, where do you see that going?
Well, I think I think everything's going to be an Uber CDP at some point. I mean, everybody wants to be a CDP, John. Look, I think it's really interesting. I think it's the opposite is occurring, I think, at the mega publishers, where there is more opaqueness and more under the hood than we understand in terms of how the algos are working or whatever. So I think the MarTech piece will matter in providing them signals. I'm not sure how much we will learn from those platforms because, you know, a lot of the levers have been taken away and a lot of the insights have been taken away. So from that perspective,
that's interesting.
You know,
which of the insights are the primary ones that have been taken away? That's
well, look, I mean, you know, I remember when Google launched responsive display, for example, and it was great. You could provide all the components for an ad. They just didn't tell you how or why, what was a winner.
Right.
And I had a lot of clients who were like, one is only I get to put out a final piece of creative. I'm not letting Google decide what the final creative looks like. And then my clients would say, what am I learning from this? How am I learning about certain messages against certain audiences? And yeah, I had a lot of clients who are like, no, thank you. You know, thank you. You know, not getting, and I may be lowering my CPA, but at the end of the day, if I'm not getting smarter, what's the point?
Yeah, you know? That's such a good way to say it. And keeping that obfuscated from the brands is not helpful for the bigger picture, right? Because they got to get smarter because it's directly correlated to what products they need to build.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. I do think MarTech and AdTech are creeping together. I mean, look, AdTech, it's going to be very well. One is it really depends on the. I think there'll be massive consolidation for certain. I mean, that's going to come. Of
course.
And you know, I think there's also more regulatory things to come, so that will be interesting. And then I think you know, advertisers are going to have to be very declarative on what their stacks are, and so forth. And what you want is also stuff that works with what the publishers have too.
Yeah.
So the media endpoints will be really important, but having these things talk together are really important. That's what I'm always sort of surprised is like today these look like IT decisions, but they're really marketing decisions. Like we have clients that have decided on a particular platform, and then we realize they have 2 media endpoints they're integrated with, and it's like, and
right.
So, but yes, it's all coming, I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be how you deploy first party data in some way, shape, or form across every touch point. And the touch point we're in may be the least interesting one, of all the ones.
Maybe, but maybe we can influence the creative more so with the data. I mean, I think you've said in the past, the role of creative media had to get to its equal value. And I think that's come the genesis of your firm. So is the data going to help the media and creative also come together there? Or do we also think that's still going to be a creative agency sitting out and
no, I do think it comes together in lots of ways. And I think, look, I mean, the interesting thing that I see right now, there are big strides being made on the creative side in ways that I really didn't quite understand, because I remember like 6 or 7 years ago, I remember the first time that Amazon started to deploy like image recognition, and I was like, okay, this should be fun. And so I had a client that had a lot of creative, and just for giggles, I uploaded it all and had Amazon categorize all the creative in a spreadsheet, and then I popped it into Tableau and was dinking around with it. And I was like, okay, so this blue is the winner, this logo is the winner,
interesting.
And I remember doing that, and it was a very manual process. And now I'm like,
Sure.
Okay, now that's part of like how we're looking at creative. And like, we can look at the elements of a piece of creative. There are smiling people in it. There are sad people in it. And we're getting those kinds of same, analysis from the content, this creative performs better when it's happy content, or this kind of creative performs better on a comedy, or, those kinds of things. I think I believe that it's a little bit like the brain. We know so little about how the brain operates. I believe that we have a long way to go to kind of marrying these things up. And it may not be the things that we think affect people, may not be the things that are actually affecting people,
Yeah, it's a great way to say it. Well, look, we're running out of time. I have 2 more questions. They're really, really important. Yeah. What is your favorite movie?
Well, I'll tell you, the one I've been reminiscing about a bunch right now is Almost Famous, and I love it. There are 2 movies that I try to watch every year. One is Moneyball. I try to watch it multiple times a year.
Awesome.
And Almost Famous is another one, and one because I think it's an amazing story. It's an amazing coming of age story, but the music is amazing. The time period is amazing. I think it was incredibly well casted. And I always leave that movie feeling happier having seen it than when I hadn't. So, I mean, look, by the way, I've got a lot of movies. If you ask me any given week, that top 5 may change, but Almost Famous almost always makes the top 5. So.
All right. What about favorite album?
Oh man. Now you're harkening back. So we had so I was with my high school buddies this weekend, and we talked about U2 Joshua Tree. For me was a seminal album, but I could also equally say that the Cars original, those 2 were both pretty great for me. But yeah, U2 Joshua Tree, when I hear it, it takes me back. So
that's special.
Sam, you're the best. What's your favorite album?
My favorite album is probably Bob Marley Uprising, because the notion for, I don't know, I've kind of always been rooting for the underdog, and he kind of represents that voice globally. I think he's probably the only musician that you can hear anywhere in the world. And I think that people have that inside them, and they appreciate how he brings it out. Sam, you're the best. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for joining me at Adtech Cafe.